Errol Graham starved to death in his own home. When his body was found, he weighed just 4.5 stone. Errol was a grandfather. He was disabled and suffered from severe mental ill health. He lived alone in his flat, but at the time of his death, he had no hot water, no heating, and no income for food and utilities. A few months before he died, Errol's out of work and housing benefits were stopped. Reviews into his death criticised the Department for Work and Pensions for its handling of his case and found that authorities repeatedly missed opportunities to help Errol. Madam Deputy Speaker, Errol's death was utterly tragic, but it wasn't unavoidable or isolated. A BBC investigation found that since 2012, 82 people had died after alleged DWP activity, such as the termination of social security support. And the lives of disabled people across the country are made more difficult, more insecure, more beset with fear and anxiety because of cruel and callous policies enacted by Conservative governments. And Madam Deputy Speaker, I highlight this because a central feature of this autumn statement is a renewed assault on the rights of sick and disabled people. This ranges from the threat to totally withdraw disabled people's out-of-work benefits if they can't find work after 18 months, to new sanctions that could see people losing access to free NHS prescriptions and legal aid. So rather than learning the lessons, the damning lessons of past DWP failures, these policies are recipes for more tragedies and more people dying alone in desperate need. And like my honourable friend, the member for Hayes and Harlington, highlighted earlier in this debate, this scapegoating follows on the back of the government's desperate attempts to demonise other marginalised groups, none more so than migrants and refugees. In both of these instances, this government is playing divide and rule. They say that the problem with our public services isn't school budgets being slashed or NHS funding cuts and privatisation. Instead, they tell the British public that their problem is the migrant next door or the disabled person down the road. The attempt is the same, to distract and divide, even if that means punishing the poor and the vulnerable, heaping misery upon misery. And it's little wonder why they do it now. As the Office for Budget Responsibility makes clear, Britain faces the biggest hit to living standards since records began, and the outlook is set to get worse, with the OVR highlighting that this autumn statement bakes in a new round of austerity cuts, with the real value of government departmental spending set to be slashed by nearly £20 billion by 2028. Behind these cuts, behind the demonisation of the poor and the marginalised, is a myth that pervades our politics. The myth that there isn't enough to go around. And it's true, Madam Deputy Speaker, that there isn't enough to go around for ordinary people. Our constituents know that too well. Millions of people struggling to make ends meet, more than 14 million people living below the poverty line, including more than 4 million children. And last year, the Joseph Rowntree Foundation found that 3.8 million people experienced destitution, and that's defined as severe poverty, where people cannot afford basic needs. And that doesn't mean just struggling to pay the bills and keep food on the table. It is choosing between heating and eating, a choice that becomes more and more painful as winter bites. So while the majority of people are struggling to make ends meet, it's simply a myth that there isn't enough to go around, because last year, for example, the wealth of Britain's billionaires grew by more than £30 billion, up to nearly £700 billion. I'm going to break that down. That's 7 followed by 11 zeros. This obscene wealth is matched by profits of some of the biggest companies in the country, from the 4 biggest banks, Lloyds, Barclays, HSBC and NatWest, which saw pre-tax profit rocket by 79% this year, to the likes of Amazon, which saw global profits nearly triple this year to around £8 billion. And I'd like to take this opportunity to pay tribute to the brave workers at Amazon's Coventry warehouse, the first in UK history to go on strike after they were offered a pay rise worth just 35 pence. And I was proud to join them again on the picket line on Friday in the biggest ever global strike at the company. And just as is true of Amazon, so is true of society as a whole. The problem is not that there isn't enough wealth. The problem is that the super rich are hoarding all the wealth, and that can be tackled. An annual wealth tax of just 1.5% on assets over £10 million, for example, would raise £12 billion a year. Equalising capital gains tax with income tax rates would raise another £15 billion a year. and ending the non-dom tax break for the super rich would raise a further £3 billion a year. Madam Deputy Speaker, this is money we could use to invest in our communities, to reverse 13 years of austerity and to build a social security system that treats sick and disabled people with the dignity and respect that they deserve. It could do everything from funding universal free school meals and ending the cruel two-child limit to properly funding our schools and hospitals, rebuild collapsing infrastructure and giving hope to everyone in every corner of this country. Madam Deputy Speaker, this failed Tory government will never do that. So it must be the mission of the next Labour government. Thank you.